Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Transformers video. This is going to be my review for Transformers War for Cybertron Trilogy, Earthrise. So this is the second season of this Netflix Transformers show. The first season was Siege, which I reviewed last year, and I guess we're going to be getting Kingdom in a couple of months or whatever. I don't really know exactly when it's coming. And basically the names are following the toy line, and I guess we're just going to finish up with another 6 episodes. Which I think brings up what ends up to me, after this season especially, that's probably going to be the main issue with this show. It's only 18 episodes for the full run of this, 3-season show. Nowhere near enough given the amount of concepts they're trying to touch on and explore. It wasn't so bad in the first season because they kept it confined to just that, the last stages of the war, the exodus from Cybertron, just covering the general things happening right at the end, and the Allspark being ejected into the space bridge. It wasn't overly complicated. It fit the 6 episodes somewhat well, arguably leaning more on the side of there wasn't enough going on rather than there's too much going on. They completely changed that in this season. So many things they just attempted to do and just throw in, as some of them just felt like references, some of them felt like, oh, the fans will like this, but they don't explain it. The Dead Universe is probably the main thing. Alpha Trion using the Staff of Solace to banish Skylinks to the Dead Universe, and somehow Skylinks or whatever is able to bring Optimus in at sort of the same time as Galvatron talks to Megatron, also in the Dead Universe, and it's what's going on here? You are not explaining this. I sort of get what they're going for, because I've read the comics that featured the Dead Universe, but to anyone sort of new to this stuff, it just sort of feels like, what's going on here? And just like I said, the characters they introduced here, Galvatron, they showed Unicron on screen for a second, introducing Scorponok, Double Dealer, one of the Quintessons, and so many kind of other just things happening in the season. Yet, do I have too much to say about pretty much any of those things outside of the fact that, oh yeah, they touched on those things? Not really, and I think it's just this real whiplash of going from being very focused on what they're doing to now being nothing's getting any development at all. In terms of positives, I liked the sort of Megatron character development they were doing in the early episodes before he realized Optimus had survived. Him dealing with, approving or not approving Shockwave's, crazy plans to basically sacrifice the citizens of Cybertron, including other Decepticons, to create energy, was really interesting in my mind. That was probably some of the best character work that the show has done. That was in contrast to, they had no clue what they were trying to do with Optimus this season. I sort of get it. They're showing him as being this leader who has doubts about what he's just done and what he should do going forward. But the problem is, in having so many doubts for this character, you question in the first place, why did Alpha Trion even give this character the Matrix? You know why he was given it, because Orion Pax get the Matrix. In Transformers, Optimus is the Prime. But this iteration of the character, they're not showing us why that is earned. And that's where my major criticism with Siege was that they, to me, skipped past all of the interesting content with the characters, that being how Megatron went from being the miner to the fighter in the gladiatorial pits to being the leader of the Decepticons, the formation of the Decepticons. They skipped over Orion Pax going from being the data clerk or cop, whatever iteration you want to do, to being the new leader of the Autobots, skipping over who the previous Prime was, those type of topics, and instead just get to this idea of it's Megatron and Optimus kind of as you know them, but a step before their G1 counterparts, and that step makes this Optimus a very frustrating character because he's just, not doing anything. He's not coming across as a good leader. And they're trying to say that no, he is. You should believe in him, like the other characters are believing in him. But you're not really being shown why. At least with Megatron, there was that sense of like, the frustration with the character of like, he's the villain, so you expect him to always make the choice that will ultimately send him down the darker path. So ultimately agreeing to Shockwave's plans, like especially like that moment I thought was probably the best part of the season. He goes to visit, I think it's like Sector 12, where they're making weapons from scrap material. And one of the injured like foreman of the plant is like, oh Megatron, like let me escort you around, and he's like, oh, like we've got like 22% efficiency, which is not that good, but he's like, it's great. And Megatron's kind of like, why is this so great? And he shows him the room with all the injured people of like, the three of them that are actually able to work are achieving 22%, which is actually okay. And he's like, he's kind of getting invested in them, like they are his people, that like the Decepticons were this, faction that like just opposed the way the Autobots were running things, but now it's become something very different. And the question is like, do we use those people as energy or keep them doing what they're doing? And he ultimately, in the end, makes the decision to shut down the plant and basically have all the people killed. That was kind of interesting. But then, to me, it went wrong the second they reintroduced the fact that like Optimus Prime is sort of alive again. And in many ways, like that's the big problem with this show, is that like Optimus Prime is meant to be the main character, but he's probably one of the least interesting characters in the show in this iteration, because they don't know what they're doing with him. That's what it feels like to me. The most interesting Autobot character for me is Elita 1. Because her, like, commanding the Autobots who are left on the planet against Shockwave and Megatron initially was actually quite good. I think it just perhaps got a little bit repetitive in terms of, like, I saw some interesting things with what they were doing. With her now in charge, Jetfire is now the one sort of questioning her in a similar way to the way she questioned Optimus in the first season, and how she sort of deals with that, but still wants to maintain hope. But you see the influence of Optimus sort of rubbing off on her in how she approaches actually doing things, that was actually kind of interesting. But it made her a much more interesting character than Optimus. So I don't know exactly where they're going to go with it from here, because like with Optimus, you were meant to, I suppose, take quite a lot from this talk with Skylinks, but I think both of these conversations where they're shown the sort of, the future or the past or whatever, Galvatron showing Megatron and then Skylinks showing Optimus, were meant to be this thing of, this is going to take these two characters, the two, leader of both factions, to the next level. But all it really did was be like, Optimus, the Matrix shows you have to fulfill your potential as a leader, or else this will happen. If you continue to doubt yourself, this is what will happen. You'll potentially go down the path of becoming Nemesis Prime. Megatron, they were clearly alluding to the fact that, how does Galvatron know anything about Megatron's destiny or what he will become and who he is? They're implying that Galvatron is Megatron, and so he is his future. So Galvatron has to make Megatron into the character to sort of get to him, I suppose. But then they did the Unicron tease, and there's the tease of that gold disc that he left behind, which was kind of interesting. But again, the main plot result of that was just kill Optimus, take the Matrix. But instead, what actually happens, and I suppose this is kind of an interesting thing, neither of them really, when it comes down to it, fully make the decision to kill one another. Now, Megatron, you can get the sense, was about to go through with it until Bumblebee arrived. But Optimus can't bring himself yet, at least, to kill Megatron. So there's still doubts, I suppose, on both sides. But the big thing is that Megatron takes the Matrix from Optimus's chest, and he's going to use that for whatever reason. I guess we'll see that in Kingdom. So that was kind of, something at least. But yeah, the season ending with like, okay, here's Earth. Finally, we're actually going down to Earth. And they tease right at the end a kind of beast transformer. Here's this dinosaur who's clearly a Cybertronian, a bot. Okay, Kingdom, part of the toy line is the dinosaur transformers. Okay. I've never been the biggest fan of the Beast Wars style transformers. I much prefer them being the kind of vehicles that we know primarily. So that gimmick, I suppose, doesn't really mean a lot to me going into the final season, in that you've already set up so much. Do you need to add in even more gimmicks of, like, we're going to see, I suppose, Optimus Primal and this the other Megatron down here, and I don't know how they're going to bring this all together in just 6 episodes, in terms of like, okay, the Allspark, they have to get that back. Do they just go straight back to Cybertron, or do they end this War for Cybertron trilogy with just everyone is on Earth to set up, this is kind of where G1 happens? Because obviously they're implying that we're in the dinosaur age here on Earth, so there's no humans yet. So they're all going to go into, I suppose, stasis until humanity is around, and who knows, they might continue this on, but I kind of doubt they will do that. I think they're going for more of this earlier stage, which is good and bad. I don't really know. As for other stuff, like, I was surprised with how kind of little Starscream really did in this. He was just sort of there to just be sort of shouted at by Megatron a couple of times. Shockwave, of course, came up with some ideas. He was mainly Elita's enemy. They had a decent fight at the end, but I didn't really think all that much of this iteration of Shockwave, because again, outside of here's a plan that I did, there was no particular setup for anything going on with him. One thing I did want to talk about, actually, right in the final 2 episodes, they did this twice with 2 characters, and I was kind of shocked that they did it so close together. Both Cog and Chromia are apparently, like, killed off at a certain point in the episodes. Chromia just gets shot, and they do the lingering shot on her. Everyone's like, Chromia, and you look down and there's a hole in her chest. And it's like, she's dead, we move away from her. But then she comes back and snipes everyone, and it's like, oh, Chromia survives. But then almost immediately afterwards, it seems like now she has been fully killed. And they did the exact same thing with Cog. Cog gets like pulled out of the ship when it's in motion, blasted out into space, and you think he's just gone. But then he turns up on the mercenary ship, and then the implication is that he dies there. And it's like, why did you do that again? Like, the character's kind of like, he's dead, no, he's back, no, he's dead. That just felt kind of weird. Like, okay, heroic moments for some of the Autobot characters, but that's really all there was to that. Other moments that I'm sort of remembering here, Megatron sort of talking to the head of Ultra Magnus was kind of interesting, but again, one of the major criticisms is just, could you not have shown some sort of like extended flashback highlighting the actual friendship between Ultra Magnus, Optimus, and Megatron? Like, I borderline burst into laughter when I saw that scene from the past that they showed of like Alpha Trion kind of going, till all are one, and he kind of basically asked the others to go till all are one, and it's the slowest line delivery from these 3 characters you can imagine, of just like, till all are one, and it's like, what emotion was I meant to get from that necessarily? Just a real lack of detail in terms of like understanding and knowing who these characters are necessarily. Megatron had some nuance to him, but without Optimus like being there on a similar level to sort of back that up, it just didn't really feel like there was any drama to their fights. In the same way that like Transformers Armada, which is like a Transformers show that tends to get sort of heavily criticized by a lot of people for most of its run, ends up having one of the best Optimus versus Megatron fights in Transformers. because they build up like their kind of fight to the death type thing as being this massive conflict between the two. Even Transformers Prime, anytime Megatron and Optimus fight, it's a big thing. Didn't feel like it here because not a lot of the action felt particularly detailed or nuanced, and I had some hope after some early stuff. Like Red Alert did this cool thing in vehicle mode where he did like a drift and he sent some bombs out and kind of tore off in the other direction. That was quite cool. But then beyond that, you got like the whole fight with Scorponok. I thought was terribly choreographed in that it was just Scorponok is basically immune to damage. Everyone is just firing on him relentlessly. Nothing is doing any damage to him. Optimus and Megatron are like implied to be able to sort of like move him if they need to, but nothing is really happening there. That was just a bit disappointing that a kind of a important, powerful type character just resorted to just this kind of big, powerful threat that doesn't really mean all that much. The Quintessence, when it was involved, what's the name? It begins with D. I can't even really remember. I thought it was creepy that you set up the idea of like, oh, it's a full Quintessence with all the different faces talking, but then one of them takes over and is annoyed by the constant need to have votes and counsel with each other, and it just cuts its other faces off to take over as one. That was kind of cool. But it almost got in the way of what was kind of maybe something interesting being set up with Double Dealer, when it's just revealed that it's the Quintessence puppeting Double Dealer right at the end. And then like Cog takes over that ship and deals with them in some way. Again, like the Quintessence was another one of these kind of concepts of like it relates to the past, and they touched on it vaguely but didn't go into quite enough detail. And you're talking about revenge, and the Transformers like know what the Quintessence are, but we're barely being kept enlightened as to what's happening. Just it felt like that throughout the entire season. Like, just keep me informed, please. Like, it wasn't terrible, but it certainly wasn't particularly great. Skylinks, I suppose his introduction was kind of like, I guess they were like, okay, cool, we'll use him, Dead Universe, and we'll have his talk with Optimus kind of redeem the character after we introduce him as like someone who just wants to take power. Fair enough. And they're going for the like wise character teaches Optimus the way to be the leader, and he sort of sacrifices himself at the end. But it still feels like Optimus is far, far away from being the leader that we really kind of need, I suppose. Bumblebee wasn't really up to that much. I liked sort of in the final episode that he sort of ended up like inadvertently taking command, and he suddenly realizes in the middle of this like, oh, sorry, Ironhide, like you're meant to be here. You're meant to be like the second in command. And Ironhide's actually like, no, you're doing a good job, kid. You stay up there, I guess. I kind of like that as like the setup for that's sort of been Bumblebee's position since he became an Autobot. He's been the one most supportive of Optimus, and here's him showing some leadership. The type of leadership we haven't necessarily seen from Optimus. Not that I think they should do a thing where they go for like Bumblebee Prime like immediately next or anything like that, because I still think they need to redeem Optimus, I suppose, before that. But yeah, outside of that, like I think the major problem here again would be that not a lot of the characters feel like they can stand out, because a lot of them are just kind of reuses of models, repaints, recolors of other characters. Like the fact that the mercenaries, like two of the main ones that you saw this season, were just basically Bumblebee and Wheeljack in like a grey and black color scheme, was just a little silly in my mind, in terms of like trying to get you behind this new faction when there's not like a single unique bot really on that side outside of Double Dealer, I guess. That sort of became the problem. Similarly, it didn't help like when so many of the Decepticon characters were just a sort of like Perceptor, the Reflector kind of remolds and stuff like that. They could have stood out if they had more like unique designs, and that's just the budget of this show, I suppose, getting in the way. that they're putting all this time into, like, oh, let's have Skylinks be over here, and let's have Unicron for a second, let's have Galvatron, but then the character who you actually connect to, like the foreman of the Decepticon Sector 12, he's just like this repaint character, even though there's probably more emotion, more of a dynamic with Megatron and that character than there is with Megatron and Galvatron. Like that's where this show just kind of just feels like it has no clue what it's really up to. And yeah, this was the season that really, I think, on this show just kind of brought me down to, like, yeah, this really isn't it. I thought after the first season there is potential with this show if they do things right and improve on it in this season. They haven't, and I really don't think they're going to be able to bring it together all that well in the last season. I'm sure, like the first two seasons, the Kingdom is going to be, have some fun stuff. It's going to be a lot of, fast-paced, going through a lot of ideas, introducing a lot of the new Beast Transformers. We'll hit on the main plots, and I suppose we'll get some sort of resolution to, like, Optimus and Megatron, and we'll see where they go about ending the show. But it just really brought down to earth that, like, look, this is not the Transformer show that we need, as I suppose to me, I suppose almost like since Transformers Prime, I don't think we've really had a properly, like, good Transformers show. I think we're still waiting after this, even though this is a little bit more on track. Still want more depth out of my Transformers, I suppose, is the main thing. So yeah, that's where I'm going to end this one. Like, yeah, it is what it is. I don't want to have my expectations, like, so high, but this definitely wasn't it. That's probably the main thing to say. So there have been my thoughts on it. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were, but that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.